It's tradition here at Seton Hall that once you pass through this university green and graduate, you can step on the steel. But some of those individuals we have not come to know. So I'm Gardner here at Pirate Television, checking with some distinguished individuals here at this university to learn about those black individuals, those brave black individuals that pass through these halls.
J. Harry Smith, who was a member of the class of 1948, who's our very first documented African-American graduate of Seton Hall University. And his life is a really interesting tale. He was born in Newark in 1922, and actually he served in World War II, and he was one of the famed Tuskegee Airmen who was trained in Alabama before going off to fight in World War II action. And as a result of his heroics, and also in terms of the GI Bill of Rights, which guaranteed educational payments for returning veterans, he was able to enroll in Seton Hall during the mid-1940s, right after the war ended. The wonderful part about the GI Bill is that Seton Hall's enrollment in 1946, after the war ended, just to give you some perspective, the student body was about a few hundred. Around 1945, during the war years, it was very sparse. There was a 94% increase in the number of admissions on campus come 1946, 47, 48. That was the highest in the nation from various sources I've checked.
And that people carried their attitudes of race and class into those new suburban developments, and consequently even GIs would have found themselves somewhat racially isolated and not welcome.
It was a really prime time in terms of what was going on, especially in terms of African American students applying and thriving here at Seton Hall. Mr. Smith was one of a few. And also I want to point out Miss Harriet Green, who was the first female graduate in 1952. She earned a BS in chemistry, but just from her yearbook photo and just looking at her accomplishments, very interesting and very excellent progress in terms of what she did.
The idea here we have to understand very clearly. A Negro student would have needed to have been psychologically very well fortified to survive the experience. And as such, it's almost like saying you had an extra burden on you. It's difficult enough for any student simply to assimilate yourself into the expectations of being at a competitive university. When you carry that extra burden of there's going to be perhaps very little social integration and then very little psychological alignment with your classmates. It's a lonely experience, and it's like you have to keep patting yourself on your own back, be your own cheerleader to keep yourself going. I had the opportunity to actually live on the same block as a Seton Hall student in the late 1950s, so we can fast forward it by about 10 years, and this young man put in his week on the campus and lived on campus like the other men, but would drive back to Atlantic City about 2 hours and maybe 20 minutes every weekend because of the social isolation that he was feeling. What he would be sharing with me would be that during the week you're sitting in classrooms with students who are mostly white, but very few of them are interacting with you on a very personal basis. He mentioned struggling through calculus with everybody else to pass that test. And after the test, when they got the results back, all the guys looked at each other, maybe 10 of them, and said, let's go out and get a beer. But they were looking right through him, as if to imply he was not welcomed.
Their experiences may have been different. And during his time on campus, he was a very popular student. And he also was very active in extracurricular activities. He was president of the International Relations Club and also president of the Bronson Debating Society. And he was also president of the junior class that he was involved with. And actually, it's interesting, if I might read from the script, I found this quote about him in the yearbook, the year he graduated in 1948, with a bachelor's degree in English. The exceedingly popular Smith is well known about campus. He's a man with intense human sympathies and a magnetic personality, which have carried him through many difficult periods of his admirable college career. So he was a very popular person, and there's a lot of images in the archives that show him in terms of group activity and at study and so forth. He ultimately became the president of Essex County College from 1972 to 1978. And before that time, and in between, he earned a master's degree from Seton Hall, and was awarded an honorary degree from this institution as well in 1972. Francis Monroe Hammond was our very first African-American faculty member who came in 1946. He taught in the philosophy department to start, and he was actually promoted to department chair a few years later, and he was the first African-American department chair of any private institution outside of historically black colleges and universities in the nation.
Hammond reminds me of something my grandmother told me many years later. As I left for college in 1961, my grandmother, who had picked cotton in the South as a sharecropper alongside of her mother, told me that, you know, Forrest, you probably are going to have to be twice as good as any white man to be accepted, you know, in the world today. And I'm thinking that's a kind of a strange comment. Here I am, 18 years old, I'm going to college, that's all it takes is a degree. I mention that story because Dr. Hammond actually possessed 2 PhDs. And I had to smile when I found it out because that sounds like grandmother. She knew it, and somebody had instructed him that if he's going to make higher education his home, he may have to be twice as prepared as any other candidate. And you only get that doctorate if you really have shown the faculty at your institution that you have mastered that content. But to go through that process literally twice just lets you know how even he understood the realities of racism as it might have impacted higher education.
Our first African-American female professor was Professor Dorothy Herbert, who was a guidance counselor and was an adjunct in our education department. And she came in the late 1950s, I believe 1959. So her contributions, along with Dr. Hammond, were very impressive and very important in terms of setting the ball in motion, so to speak, in terms of just having high-quality educators regardless of background.
To make sure that the story is told beyond posting up their pictures. So often in America, perhaps most of us are inclined to go for the quick take, which means you can put their picture up, you see it, and you say, we've done some good things. Here's our first 2 black graduates. That would be very insufficient because we would approach that photograph one-dimensionally. Let's make the photograph and other inscriptions and other quotes and put their biographies up so that everybody can get a 3-dimensional understanding, not only of what they did, but what was the context in which the Negro population then was integrating American higher ed. American higher ed was not, at that point in time in the 40s or 50s, not highly integrated at all. That comes about in the latter part of the 1960s. And I've been here for, like I said, over the last 40 some odd years, trying to make life better for everybody. While we are a world-class university, there's always things we can learn ourselves as an institution and the culture we represent. So that has become a part of my almost divine mission. As I think I'm grateful for God's strength, because sometimes it's been very, 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 very challenging to bring about the types of not only changes, but the types of accommodations that we all need to be a part of. Despite the odds, let's continue to go forward. Be willing to listen to one another. Be compassionate. Do not let what you think you know about the circumstance dictate what you do. Be willing to share your vision with the vision of others so that together we are unified.